We'll give everybody a couple of minutes to join, or a minute or two to join us. I'll have to do a couple of minutes. I'm not going to torture people. So the way I'll do this is I'm going to jump through the questions on the board first of all, and then we'll kind of dive into the chat as well as we go along. Make sure you I think it's down probably on y'all's thing. It's up on mine, but because it helps our algorithm. Feel free to share these with Georgia Tech fans. Always looking to grow the site, getting new people in our orbit, paying attention. The more people on the site, the more things we can do, the cooler stuff like adding Russell. Over the last few years, I'd like to add another writer at some point. So that would help with team stuff. So that's sort of where we're at with it. So just to let you guys know, kind of a little behind the scenes stuff. My Heart 8 barbecue cup from one of my many trips to Dallas. The consistent of pit barbecue places. Not probably the best, but it's like near the airport where I usually am on the north side of Dallas. So that's where I took Russell, and he had a religious experience having his first pit barbecue. Oh yeah, and everyone should subscribe if they it's free. So if you have YouTube and you have an account and you're certainly in the chat, you can subscribe because that also helps me. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll kind of tell like a little bit of the backstory as far as I've been able to piece it together, and then there's already some funny comments in the chat. The one that just made me laugh was someone asking me if it was awesome to again be in the presence of Terrence Moore. I grew up reading him a little bit and seeing him on ESPN and stuff like that. So it is kind of weird that he has like this sort of job that I don't quite understand. He does a lot of freelancing, but he's certainly not the same character as he was when he was in his AJC Power days. Always been very nice to me. I don't really talk to him much, but has been very nice. He keeps pretty low key when he's at this stuff. Yeah, hit the notification thing too, so you know when I come online. Someone asked me if there's any similarities between this hire and Penny Hardaway. No, because I mean, the similarity would be if Georgia Tech went and hired Chris Bosh or Derek Favors or Amon Shumpert or whoever, like some former legendary player. This is hiring a high profile guy. It would be more akin to Jerry Stackhouse at Vanderbilt, who's not an alum there, or Danny Manning at Wake Forest. Hopefully, those are not the two best examples of that, but Stack's doing much better this year. He's still got to mature a little bit with how he deals with media. I'm trying to think of some other players that are head coaches now that were actually good NBA players. There's a lot of guys that were like sort of mediocre, borderline. Like Tony Bennett was a mediocre NBA player who just kind of hung on in the league for a long time, but ended up, becoming a great head coach. So there's a lot of different ways to cut it. I think point guards generally fare a little bit better in some of this stuff. And obviously Damon's really worked hard to work his way up. If you aren't familiar kind of with his backstory, he started out at Rice, I think, as a like recruiting guy. And then Josh Pastner hired him at Memphis. He got on the bench. They went and worked for Sean Miller for a little bit. I don't really know the backstory there. Some crazy person on Twitter was trying to feed me with some weird conspiracy stuff that had just started on Twitter that day. I ended up just blocking that person because it seemed like really crazy. Whatever. J-Bat and that staff definitely did a lot of due diligence with, background checks and those kinds of things. And Josh ended up bringing him back to Memphis, and then he ended up Pacific College, and I think it's in Stockton, California. Someone said. I'm not even sure. And it is literally one of the worst jobs in like a conference that's really dominated by Gonzaga and BYU, and then there's really been some brief periods where like Pacific or Santa Clara or a couple other teams in that league have made the NCAA tournament, but it's been very unusual. It's like a 1-2 bid league, and not a program with a lot of resources. And then he eventually seemed like got burned out by that and left to go work for the Celtics with his buddy who became the head coach there, who's now the one that got bounced out of there, and Joe Mazzulla is running a show now there. But he was the lead assistant with the Celtics. He was a guy that's been on NBA radars. The ironic part about hiring Damon Stoudamire is a year ago I had a really long conversation with Josh Pastner about Damon Stoudamire. And that conversation was me like when Coach Reveno left to go back out to the West Coast. I had a phone call with Josh, and I was just trying to pick his brain about what he was doing with that open spot. And I was like, "Hey, Damon hasn't got a job yet. Would he come back?" And he's like, "No, he's like doing really well." And he laid out all this stuff and why he likes Damon and why he hired him twice, and thinks the world of the guy. So that's obviously sort of a bittersweet piece of all this, I'm sure, right now for Josh Pastner. But this is a guy that I've had multiple people that have like zero connection. It was funny. There was a national media person that I'm pretty friendly with that when the job came open was like, this is a guy they should look at. And I was sort of like, well, it sounds like they're looking at this guy, this guy, and this guy. And we had a kind of back and forth about it. And there were sort of three names initially that I was looking at, which was Pat Kelsey, Bob Ritchie, and then Amir Abdul Rahim at Kennesaw State. And Amir, as I said on Jackets Online, went as far as to start piecing together what would be a staff. And I think he thought he had like a legit shot at the job. I have no idea how far along that went with him. To me, that's a guy that I think needs more. I mean, Damon has way more head coaching experience than Amir at this point at a higher level. As a college coach, the league he was in was much better than the league that Kennesaw State plays in. So it was just, I think the timing wasn't there for that type of hire. Pat Kelsey and Bob Ritchie, there's a couple different issues. The main issue right now with hiring those two guys is it puts you behind at least a week, depending on how they do in the tournament. It puts you back 2 weeks. None of those guys are going to walk in the middle of the tournament. You wouldn't want in basketball to hire someone that would walk from their team at that level after winning like a conference championship or whatever to get to the tournament. I think that's sort of bad mojo, for lack of a better word. Jay wanted to move quickly. I was talking to people yesterday, talking to sources, and I felt like it was escalating pretty quickly when I first kind of heard about this going on Sunday into Monday morning, when I could actually finally like kind of confirm what had happened. Essentially, that Damon was on a list, but I don't know that he was at the top of the list. But they ended up meeting with him when the Hawks were hosting Boston on Saturday, and he really knocked it out of the park. Had a plan, was really interested in the job. I think he's a guy that would only take a couple of college jobs. He was obviously, ironically, also him, Josh Pastner, and Tommy Lloyd were sort of the three guys that were in that Arizona job. It was really Tommy Lloyd's job to lose, but there was a lot of push from alums and all those people for either Josh or Damon Stoudamire to show like how different things are when you just get away a few years from things in college basketball. And ultimately, when you look at everything, and I think I wrote about this a little bit, for what killed Josh was the lack of interest from the program, from fans. They just became disengaged with what the product was, and that's what killed him. It wasn't, he didn't have terrible plans and anything else. There was just a lack of winning, and this is a conversation I would have with him from time to time. It's like the floor of Georgia Tech should be what Clemson's done in men's basketball. It's not what Georgia Tech's been doing at the lower points of Brian Gregory or Josh Pastner or even Paul Hewitt. Like, And Paul Hewitt had more extremes because of the one and dones, where it was a little harder to explain that when you had Brian Gregory and Josh Pastner not having anything close to one and done guys. So, that the recruiting talent, the lack of putting guys in the NBA, the inconsistent product, you lose to Duke, you get doubled up at home by Duke. Those things all start to pile up. And I felt like it was a coin flip if he could convince Jay Bat when they met on that Thursday after the ACC tournament. Maybe he stays, maybe he goes, but that meeting was going to determine what happened. And Jay Bat admitted that today was the sort of turning point one way or the other. So, as Jay said, all good ADs, except for some that have made hires at Georgia Tech, have a list of guys in a drawer. And there he was ready to go. And he had, a bunch of guys that contacted a lot of different people. There were a lot of discussions. The names that I put out there were the ones that I know there was at least some level of contact about. I'm not even positioned yet enough about how the search unfolded to tell you that, hey, they interviewed X, Y, and Z. I know, there was definitely interest in maybe hiring a minority candidate because you're in Atlanta, and that would go a long way, especially someone with a name in the area that's where, Amir or Damon Stoudamire makes sense, right? Like, you get these guys that are well known that have recruited this area before. So I think all of those things kind of worked in Damon's favor. He's coached at the highest level there is in pro ball, been the lead assistant in pro ball, a guy that fans of the Celtics are upset has left the program. I mean, my uncle and cousins are big Celtics fans, and they knew all about Damon Stoudamire, and we had talked about him when I was up there a couple of weeks ago, but not relating to Georgia Tech. It was more like, when's this guy going to get an NBA job as a head coach? And so that's how he's viewed. So it is a lot different. I mean, this is the first time, and this is the third different hire since I've covered Georgia Tech, and the first time they haven't hired a guy that the other opposing fan base, I mean, not the opposing, the fan base where he was currently employed didn't kind of want them to leave or wasn't cheering for them to leave. With Josh, like, Memphis fans were upset because he couldn't get off day one of the tournament. With Brian Gregory, I think he had kind of run his course at Dayton and done as much as he could, and they kind of had leveled out and wanted him gone. And that this is someone that was desired, and that's a difference, right? Even really, if you go to football, like, I don't know, no one was chasing after Jeff Collins. Paul Johnson, yes, he had Duke and Georgia Tech, but it wasn't like he was getting, at that point, he hadn't proven enough at a P5 level. They weren't Auburn and NC State and all the schools that came after him later had to see him do that. They weren't knocking down his doors when he was at Navy. So I think this is a really interesting move, and Jay runs this thing like a business, and that's exciting to see as someone that makes their living off of the success and failure and interest level in the program. I think it's cool that they're actually, setting a standard, and that ultimately what did Josh in is he wasn't hitting the standard they had even with limited resources, which I sort of agree with. Like, I don't disagree with anything that happened. I think that if that's the analysis you made and what you believe as an AD, you don't keep the guy around just for the sake of saving $2.5 million or $2 million or whatever. I think that's those decisions, and making those decisions of keeping people around has caused a lot of harm to Georgia Tech over the years, and being cheap. So I'm excited about it. We'll start getting into the questions now. So the first question is asking me about Pat Kelsey and Bob Ritchie actually candidates, or were they just names tossed out there to throw people off? The reasoning made sense that Bat already knew they had his guy when Josh was fired. That obviously was Damon Stoudamire. It was not. That's not necessarily how it went down. He had a list of guys. He talked about this. And there were other people interviewed for the job. That's like, I can tell you that. The questions on everyone's mind was the word on the street about potential assistants, including any updates on Chad Dollar, Julian Schwartz being in the mix, whispers about NIL budget, facility upgrades, budget for support staff. So, yeah, there's a lot of names being floated with assistant coach job. I don't know that anything's been decided yet. One way or the other, like with a guy like Julian or Tyler Benson, who was also with them in Memphis, that's on the staff. Those two guys could I could see them being retained. I could see them making a clean slate. That's all going to be Damon Stoudamire. I don't know the guy at all, so I don't know where to make those judgments. NIL budget. I was told they would have a competitive budget. I can't get a number out of anyone. If you're wondering, that's. But there was money even if Josh had stayed. So they had started to get money together. Obviously, they were kind of eyeballing Miles Kelly as someone that might be potentially someone that would be poached, and they would need to step up and pay some NIL money there, and then also to try and attract the pieces that are missing. Obviously, that all changes now with the new staff because you don't know who's going in the portal, who's staying, how any of that plays out, and what those kids want to do because they are kids ultimately at the end of the day. Supposedly there will be more budget for staff. I believe that includes support staff. This would fall in line with what happened with Brent Key, is that JBAD understands that you need to spend money on those things, but it's also factored into the deal. They're not overpaying for coaches anymore either. So like Jeff Collins' contract was overpaid relative to his experience and where he was in the market, and they're not doing that anymore. So if you can get out of that, that'll help. Someone asked me how many candidates made unsolicited inquiries at JBAD. I assume there were quite a few. There are a lot of people interested in the job. The question always becomes, is it someone that fits? Is it someone that makes sense? I mean, if Danny Manning's calling, you're not taking Danny Manning's call, or, Johnny Dawkins or whatever. Like those guys, you're not taking their call. There's always going to be somebody trying to jump to their next job, trying to get back into it. They're the people calling and telling him he should hire Mark Price or Noodles or whoever. Like you got to filter all that stuff out. Jay apparently does a good job of that. He learned a lot, I think, during the football search when everyone was offering their opinion, to just shut it down and focus on the task at hand versus trying to listen to what everyone wanted. Initial reactions by the returning players. Obviously, Kyle is all in, but your thoughts on keeping Kelly, Coleman, Terry, and Moore? Chances they're able to hang on to Blue. Obviously, Blue Kane decommitted today. You just don't know what that market is. Like you don't know what his options will be like. Right now, everyone is so focused on the portal that you can't. Teams aren't necessarily as interested in even high school kids this late in the cycle unless there's a coaching change. So the places I would look at with Blue Kane that are going to come up are going to be places that had coaching changes and or guys leave that are underclassmen in the portal. Those will be more involved than maybe even like the initial contenders that were in his recruitment. Obviously, I would assume Damon Stoudamire will still recruit him. He's a good three-point shooter. He's a very good ball handler. He can play both guard spots. He's big enough to play both guard spots and like some posts I saw on JOL. He's a legit guy. Like Russ Wood, who works for me, does a lot of basketball recruiting, watched him play a lot. And Russ could care less. Russ is a Maryland fan. Like he doesn't have any skin in this game. And he said that Blue's like a legit guy. And if we're up to him, he'd be a top 100 player. Let's see. Is there any sense that this, from around the league, writers, blah, 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 this is sending a message that Tech is now serious about turning things around? I think that's become abundantly clear with the way that JBAD and his staff are handling things. From talking to even people in Greensboro, talking to a lot of veteran ACC people who have been around, that people that know Jay have known Jay for 20 years. They think that Georgia Tech hit a home run here with this AD hire. And obviously the thing he's going to be judged on ultimately are these hires. Brent Key, I think he could get a little bit of a mulligan there. Obviously Damon Stoudamire. And, it's funny. I had a conversation with someone down there, the other day, and it's like, you're making these two hires right out of the box before you even have a full grasp of everything at Georgia Tech. So that's tough to make those decisions and those calls so quickly, but it's the way it worked out. I think with Brent, they made the right decision, regardless of how Brent Key does. If you give him 2 years, if he's not making a bowl game, then I imagine they'll make a change. And Brent would tell you that if you asked him privately, probably. Like he understands what his task is. His task is to get the program back on level set and then build something long term. a lot akin to what O'Leary did at Central Florida, or even when Georgia Tech hit reset when he became the head coach at Georgia Tech. With Damon Stoudamire, basketball is a different animal, man. Like, I didn't think they would go get a name guy like this, so I'm really curious if he can turn it around faster. When they were talking about Pat Kelsey or Bob Ritchie, that's what I'm talking about, a 3-year timeline of resetting, and I don't know that you have that timeline with Damon Stoudamire. I think maybe he wins faster than that. I think he's going to attract guys. I mean, I was telling somebody today, I was like, this is the first time in my life I'm covering someone who I played with in a video game as a child. Like, like he was one of the players I used to play sometimes with the Raptors or Portland and NBA Live or 2K or whatever. And it's such a weird thing to have a guy that was like a real like star player, and it's very kind of down to earth and cool. I had a really nice vibes with him today, and a little bit I got to talk to him, and I actually kind of got to watch him operate a little bit as well, and was impressed with what I saw. I also won't, I love Josh, but I won't miss having 4 minutes of a press conference taken up with him talking about the movie Heat from 1995. Like, I don't feel like we're going to get a lot of that with David Stoudamire either. What are the reasons you didn't interview any of the mid-major high school head coaches, if not why? So I think they talked to the Pat Kelseys and Bob Ritchies, and I know they talked to Amir Abdul Rahim. So, like, there were conversations. I don't know why everyone's hung up that you with Zoom and everything else these days, like, you can interview, I can tell you just from Brent Key's process when he was hiring an OC, he was interviewing, a bunch of people every day, and you can do it all on Zoom. Like, you don't have to do it in person. You do it in person when it gets serious, right? Like, and it happened to luck out that Damon was here. If he had not been here in Atlanta, then maybe this thing gets pushed out a few more days and it doesn't happen till the end of the week or something. But the timing of it just kind of worked out perfectly that he was here. They were able to meet with him, and it escalated very quickly. The names that I've brought up are the people that were in discussion for the job, and that those are the people that initially were on the list in the drawer. What are reasonable expectations for next year? Who's on the team? If you can tell me that, I can tell you what the expectations are. I know Stoudamire's defense has been lauded. How does the system compare to Josh Pastner's? No idea. I can tell you I have probably never watched a game Damon Stoudamire's coached as a head coach. I've seen the Celtics play, but he doesn't have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Williams and any of those cats at Georgia Tech. So I don't know that it's going to be – and they don't play a ton of defense in the NBA as it is. It's a lot of just one-on-one play. I think it's going to be very different than that. How soon should we see additional staff changes and hires? Really all the way through the Final Four, because it just depends on who's working where. I mean, right now, the way it works is kind of crazy. You're seeing even in college football, guys still being hired right now. Like, Virginia Tech was hiring like a quarterbacks coach and something else, an offensive line coach maybe this week. Like, it is the timetable thing and like things having to be done. That stuff's all out the window right now. Ideally, you would have your staff in place. I mean, Brett Key had his staff in place and then had his, one of his guys poached for a defensive coordinator job. So you just don't know. Depends on what other moves are made and if guys move to the pros or not. That throws everything, a wrench in everything. Will coach need to hire an offensive-minded assistant? Also, is he planning on bringing coaches with him from the NBA? Don't know. I can't imagine he's going to bring anyone from the NBA that is immediate, like some guy that's on a bench with the Trailblazers or whatever team. No, I don't see that, but I could see him hiring people he's had connections with in the past. There's no one in particular that like really strikes me as like, hey, this is the guy he's got to hire. I think he's going to probably have a pretty open mind about that. As far as being offensive minded, he was a point guard in the NBA. He knows how to run offense. I'm pretty sure he has a hand in what the Celtics are doing offensively too. Somebody asked me a question about Anthony Wilkins. I'm not going to answer that. What is your thoughts on someone independently wealthy coaching at Georgia Tech and having the ability to fund NIL? He played in the league with Lethal Weapon 3 guys. and knows his guys well and shares a bond. How much does he move the needle? Blah blah blah. Yeah, I mean there were guys at the press conference today, and that was with what less than 24 hours notice because we got the email. He got announced at what 2 p.m., 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The press conference was 10 a.m. this morning, so there were guys there already. Dennis Scott, James Forrest, Roger Kaiser is not in that same timeline. But yeah, I think there's a lot of guys he played with in NBA that are going to be interesting. I'll take a couple from the chat here to keep going. Any transfer portal name whispers yet? No, I think it's going to take a little bit of time to figure out what's happening there, one way or the other, like who's coming and who's going. And as of, let me look at my phone right now, make sure I don't have any weird messages I missed, but no one's gone in and no one's come out. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time. Blue Kane got released from his NIL, but from his NLI, but he could also end up coming back. He's left the door open for that. So we'll see what happens there. Someone asked me about Nell Fortner. I mean, Nell's done a good job, and this year they kind of ran into the ditch, but I don't think anything's going on with her. Yes, a lot of the movement, as I said, happens it'll be in Houston this year where the Final Four is. That's where a lot of the interviews for assistants happen. A lot of the your support staff hires, those things, because everyone congregates there. It's like a coaches convention there may actually be a coaches convention now I think about it in Houston. And so that's where a lot of business is done. And typically when you see a lot of those hires made, and right now, to be honest with you, Damon can probably do a lot of things himself. Remember, this is not football. He's putting together a roster of 12 to 13 guys, not putting together a roster of 85. Or really 100 with walk-ons. You're not doing that. You're just trying to find 10 guys, 11 guys. So that'll be interesting. Any word from national media on this hire? This is the most press that Georgia Tech's gotten for men's basketball since winning the ACC tournament. You can turn on ESPN, you can turn on whatever, and you will see Georgia Tech's name mentioned. They're being talked about on the radio, being talked about in sports talk, even in New England, especially with the Stoudamire connection. So this is definitely, the timing of this worked out really well because it's pre-tournament. So if this had happened Thursday, you would have been buried under March Madness. And so this had a nice little cycle from Monday afternoon through today where Georgia Tech's gotten a lot of attention for this hire. Your educated guess, did Georgia Tech land a 5-star under Damon Stoudamire? Seems like he would have some pull for higher guys off the rip. Yeah, I mean they could. Georgia Tech was landing those guys before. What's been holding them back in this whole thing is the NIL piece of it. So if you find the right kid and have the right package for that kid, yeah, you could get a 5-star guy. Is it going to be what it was 20 years ago? Not until they start winning. If you start winning, then that can change it because more money comes in if you start winning and you become more attractive. No one gave a crap about Virginia since Ralph Sampson until Tony Bennett turned it around and started winning. Now they compete for high-level recruits. Winning cures all, right? Like in anything, whether it's football or whatever, there are always going to be blue blood programs that get their share, but there's also room for other programs. Look at Gonzaga as a great example. What the hell was Gonzaga for the longest time, I think, was where John Stockton played, right? And then slowly they built their program up and now they sign really high profile kids. So I think that, you could see a 5-star in the future. I think it would be a lot easier than when, I think his personality is going to move the needle a little bit more in rooms than Josh too. Josh is such an earnest, honest guy. And I don't know that he plays as well in this day and age when kids are really looking at the bottom line. Josh, has lost out on kids because he was probably too honest with them. So I think there's room for a guy that's, got a little more bravado about him to go in and nail some of those kids and land them. were instantly relieved when you saw how pissed the Celtics fans were about the news. That's the first thing I went and looked for. I mean, I knew all about Damon Stoudamire, right? Like, this was not a shock to me that he got a college job. It was shocking that it was Georgia Tech, but it was not shocking that he got a big job in college basketball. And yeah, I assume that people would be pissed. I am, you know, I to me, like, I think this makes a lot of sense. So good for him. With the portal just opening up, this looked to be the type of hire that'll get kids' attention. I know NIL will play a big part. He well respected from the NBA and draw a lot of interest in the portal. Yeah, I think if you're a guy that's worked with pro guys and knows what it takes, I mean, he had a tremendous pro career. What's the average length of an NBA guy's career? It's probably not very long. He played for a long time in the NBA and was very successful. He worked under some really amazing people, Lute Olson, and you know, and even in the NBA, was under tutelage of great guys. So, like, I think that there's going to be a lot of people attracted to that, and that fact he can talk about he was with the Celtics and that he played at Arizona and he played in the NBA forever, and those things are going to sell. Like, if he does a good job, it's going to sell. Are his kids basketball players? I think his kids looked a little bit older to me than I don't think they're college age, man. His two boys were at the thing today. I was trying to find out how old his kids are. I can't see it easily, but they looked above. They didn't look like college aged kids. Does Damon Stoudamire believe in gas station food stops? No idea. I don't know how that. Yeah, everybody has their own traditions, right? That was just sort of a fluke one that started with Georgia Tech. You know what they choose to keep and not keep has always been interesting. You look at Georgia Tech football or the different traditions there. Men's basketball, those things. Everyone has their different things. That was unique to Josh. Do they keep that? I have no idea. Someone asked me if I heard any names other than Chad Dollar. Yeah, I mean, my whole thing is I don't want to throw people's names out unless I'm like confident that there's mutual interest, and that's the part I haven't been able to like really confirm. I mean, obviously there's people like Mufon Adofia or Chad Dollar or a few others that would like to come here and be part of the staff if they can. I think with Chad, it's about coming back to Atlanta, and he loves it here. But his team's they have a game tonight or Wednesday. I think they're in the play-in game, or they're in NIT or something, and I can't remember. So those things have to play out a little bit, and maybe a lot of the people he'd be interested in are still coaching somewhere as well. And there's he's been connected with a lot of interesting people over time, so that's for sure. Someone mentioned Kyle Sturdivant to get a lot better. He told a great story today about Kyle Sturdivant and how when he played like crap, he wouldn't take his calls sometimes, or when he didn't play much. And then he would talk to him more when he did well and ask him why and try to motivate him that way. Like, what did you do well? Kyle's obviously, they're super close. That's a good connection just in terms of locker room because Kyle's respected by the other guys on the team. I think, the two guys probably who benefit the most from this are Kyle Sturdivant and Davon Smith, who will get a chance to be developed by a guy that's an NBA guy. They'll play in a more open system that's more point guard friendly. The Josh's Princeton offense and the variations on that they ran when they got into the half court kind of ground a lot of that to Holt. And Davon, I think, is a little more comfortable playing at tempo and space. And Kyle, I think, is certainly capable of playing that way too. I think Kyle's big, the two big things with Kyle are, his stamina and, making the most of his athletic ability. He's not the most talented guy in the world, but he's got a weird shot that it works for him. He's just got to be consistent with those things. And when he plays consistently and can keep his wind. I think he's really effective at times, and he kind of wanes up and down with his confidence. And when he has confidence, he plays well, and then when he doesn't, it snowballs on him a little bit. So um, I'll be really interested to see what that relationship's like moving ahead. Someone asked me a football. I'll get in a couple of football questions as I see them real quick, just because we're on here and I'm not sure. Probably do something next week, but with the change in strength and conditioning, do you notice the players looking a little different physically, good or bad? I noticed the offensive linemen were trimmed up quite a bit. I put a picture of Joe Fusel on the in the photo gallery for an example, and he didn't have a gut anymore. He had a gut last year. I thought they looked in much better shape. From talking to everyone with Jeep Wade, he's a guy that understands how to work with smaller guys that are maybe not prototypical NFL guys. I think Brent had been away from that for a little while, and maybe that wasn't like super helpful for him. And he also was starting from scratch with a lot of it with the line. And they're now starting to get to where they have guys that have been in the system 3-4 years, have been in college football for a little while, and their bodies are developing more. So I think that, to me, that was one of the noticeable changes I noticed, that the defensive linemen looked the offensive linemen looked leaner. Everyone looked like they were in pretty good shape, which I kind of stood out to me a little bit too. I just didn't see that as much with the previous regime. Football day, the returning players surprise you at practice. It was the first day, man. Trying to think if anyone surprised me. I thought Sarah Bryant looked really good at safety. He was flying around. He looked really comfortable with what they're asking him to do. I think he's going to slot in at that strong safety spot behind Miles Brooks, and he's a freaky dude, and he can hit somebody like a pipe. He is a dude that could be dangerous if you can figure out how to harness all of that. You could see it on special teams. He's chippy. I like that. Guys blew up the weight room. It's hard to say, man. There were some groups I didn't see like super well. I was kind of working a whole field during kind of a 2-hour window, and that was it. Speed wise, anyone that caught my attention. I think Christian Larry can fly. But I assumed he could when he was at Alabama. Making plays. I talked about Surratt already. That was really the only one. Did any of the new transfers or freshmen surprise you? Evan Dickens, I had no idea he was that big. I never saw him in person prior to him coming to Georgia Tech that I can remember. I may have seen him at a camp or something at some point, but I thought he looked really good. He was bigger than I expected, which was the next question. Faster, I don't know. They're running around in shells. It's hard to tell. I know time is money, and with the portal opening, Jay Bat had to make a decision quick. Do you think it was made too quickly? Time will tell, right? This is I have no idea. Damon Stoudamire could be the next Tony Bennett. He could be the next Danny Manning. We don't know. And so, time's only going to be the only way to figure that out. Is Edwards future Georgia Tech at running back or safety? Seems like a good player stuck behind some guys. How did Edwards look at running back? I thought Caleb Edwards looked fine. They do need a bigger guy back there, and he gives them that. And that was something that was why they moved him. And I explained this on the board. He was at a position where it was a log jam of older guys, or not older guys, but guys playing. I mean, they changed the way the nickel position was. It wasn't going to be a guy that's a Sam linebacker or a big, strong safety type or whatever. And so when they went with, KJ Wallace and playing smaller guys there that are faster, they're more coverage oriented, that really kind of aced out Caleb Edwards' role there. And at safety, you have Miles Brooks, who's an all ACC level dude. You have Jay King, has the talent to be an all ACC level dude. You have Clayton Powell-Lee, who's an all ACC freshman for 2 spots, right? And you have Sarah Bryant, you have Jalen Marshall, who are both really talented, big physical safeties that both run a little bit better in space than Caleb. I think that it makes a lot of sense to put him in a position where he can get on the field. Regarding today's presser, can you speak to the message being sent by President Cabrera was not only at the presser, but also gave the opening remarks? That is pretty normal for a press conference for the president to come and introduce a new coach. I think that I'm trying to remember if Bud did that or not. He might not have. He was not a Bud Peterson was not a super media guy. Angel's been great to deal with on my end. I've had some nice conversations with him. A few times I get to talk to him or see him. Um, he actually liked my story on Twitter today, which I appreciated. Um, but I have seen that. I've seen that in my time covering other schools too. That the school president or someone that's like higher up than the AD comes out and introduces people. Um, this guy did say that Bud wasn't there when Jeff or Pastner got hired, and was Bud I don't know. But Cabrera's been much more involved in all of this, and he had input on what he wanted J Bat to do. I can tell you that with 100% certainty. Do you still think it's a 3 to 4 year rebuild when when I was contemplating firing Josh? This was sort of the one asterisk I should have put on that at the time. If you can get a guy that's a name that moves the needle, then it definitely changes things. How was the response to Damon Stoudamire being hired in the Atlanta high school and AAU circles? Everyone I've talked to and the few people have thought it's like this is like a home run guy. Most of them are excited about having a minority coach that played in the NBA, that has recruited Atlanta and signed big time kids from Atlanta, and that they like and have maintained relationships with even. And that was something that Damon talked about in his presser, that he had maintained relationships with a lot of these people, envisioning one day maybe coming back to being a college coach and just being a good guy overall. One of the things that was interesting to me too is I got his phone number immediately from one of my buddies that covers something else, because they were like, hey, I talked to Damon all the time when he was at Pacific and Memphis and Arizona, and it was easy to figure that out. Final Four next year. Yeah, let's not put that cart before the horse. What are your thoughts of Coach Damon comparing college NIL to pro, in his case, the NBA salary caps, particularly if you saw any winces from other panelists around the room? He's calling a spade, and I guess more coaches, Lane Kiffin, have started talking more openly about it. I found it interesting to hear. I picked up on that as well. I thought it was really telling. I think that's how Brett Key views it. I think that's how most people actually view it. They won't say it, that the NIL is your salary cap, right? It's your budget. It's the same thing as my budget when I hire my writers, that people that work for me on my different sites or whatever. Like, I have a budget. This is how much I could spend. It fluctuates year to year. It fluctuates, in my case, month to month. And you have to balance all of that. It sucks, but it's the way it is now. I think it's an honest approach to be open about it and be like, hey, look, we have X number of dollars we can spend. Josh had $0. So Josh was able to claw together Javon Franklin and Lance Terry this offseason, and got lucky that he didn't have a Mike DeVoe that was an older guy that needed money to play another year. And, the story I tell is the one that I heard at the ACC championship tournament, not championship, but the tournament. Armando Bacot supposedly is making, or allegedly is making, $1.2 million at UNC. He's apparently going to come back for another year because he's making $1.2 million. He's not going to make that in the G League. He's not going to make it in China or Europe or wherever he plays, Russia, Turkey, wherever. Like, he's not going to make that money. So he's better off staying in college and making money at UNC. And UNC, and Pitt and some of these other teams that have spent money, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It worked for NC State and Pitt. It didn't work for Carolina. Carolina got like maybe the worst return on an investment since the New York Mets. Like, wow. Like, they went from number one preseason, which was a stupid preseason number one, but still to not making the tournament with that roster is almost criminal as a coach. So I it's going to be real interesting. I'm going to be real interested to see what happens with Hubert Davis too. Like, can he actually coach? Is this going to be Matt Doherty 2.0? Um, is he like, was that it for him making that run to the championship game, or does he have something more in the tank? Like, I don't know. I was really unimpressed with their watching him coach. Rather, I mean, they kicked Georgia Tech's butt, but I was very unimpressed watching him at times. Someone asked me about getting a feel for Stoudamire's connections to the local AAU scene. Um, and it mentions that it would be a concern in football to hire a coach that doesn't have connections. It's not really a thing. Like, if you have some connections to the right AAU coaches, which he does, and you can work your connections. Obviously, he knows tons of people that know all of these people, right? James Forrest was there. Mufon wants a job at Georgia Tech if he can get it. Like, there's guys that are willing to work with you. You just got to work with them. You got to avoid the situations that were sort of the pitfall for Brian Gregory with his staff, that they got played by a couple of those AAU guys too. It's murky waters you got to navigate, and I think he's a clever guy and understands all that. He was been coaching at the highest level. He's not going to have trouble walking into a gym and getting attention of people. It's not like Joe Schmo walking in or me walking in off the street and trying to get someone's attention. Like, he's not going to have that issue. Do you think this will be a Dion situation, much smaller scale compared to football? Will Damon come in and ask players to leave that aren't talented enough to compete in the ACC and look to the portal? No idea. I don't know what his thought process is. I think that a lot of that's not going to play well at Georgia Tech. So I would advise him to tread lightly with kicking guys off the team. But the truth is, the guys that are struggling, we all know who they are likely to, we're going to move on from anyways. Like, Josh was going to move them on. So, if he has to process with you guys, so be it. If there's guys that leave, then that's fine. Who's the first recruit transfer that you think Damon Stoudamire goes all in on, and why? Who I would go all in on, who I really like their game and would be a great fit, is John Hughley, the Pitt big man that just hit the portal today. I don't know if he can get in Georgia Tech or not. That's something else Damon's going to learn a lot about over the next couple months, years. But he's a great talent. He played, I think, 9 games this year. I think he's a really skilled big man. I think he would be a great addition to the type of play that I think they're going to play. I think you need to get somebody that can score inside and clean up and work the offensive glass, and I think he gives you that, and you don't need to run the offense through him. Do I think Damon Stoudamire will try to re-recruit Blue Kane? Probably. I think it all depends on what his numbers look like and what he's looking for. I don't have a profile of what his ideal guy at each position is and what he's looking at yet. So, after talking with Damon Stoudamire and Jay Batt, how do you feel about the hire? I know you said you weren't sure what to think yesterday, but after talking to him, did it clear up some questions for you? Yeah, I mean, I think that I understand now why they made the move. I understand why Jay went this direction. I think it makes more sense than, going and hiring a coach from Kennesaw State that's had one really good season and playing at a low-level league and doesn't have the same breadth of even coaching experience that Damon Stoudamire has at the level that Damon has it at. So, or even as a head coach. So, to me, all things being equal, if you're not going to wait around and hire Pat Kelsey or Bob Ritchie and you're going to go this route, I think this was the way to go. I have no issue with the hire. I think it makes sense. Ironically, given my close relationship with Josh, it's very funny because I was very adamantly against hiring him when Mike Babinski hired him. And I had a conversation with Mike Babinski after meeting Josh and talking to him. But the last 2 basketball hires, I had a visceral reaction to, prior to this, Brian Gregory and Josh Pastner. I was like, ugh, like what the hell are you doing? Because it made no sense to me in a basketball context. Like, that I just didn't think they were good hires. And Yeah, I grew to really like Josh. Yeah, I understood Brian Gregory, but I thought he was his own worst enemy. But with Josh, I understood kind of where things went sideways. But I think that this is a hire that generates interest in the program. That's a hire that a guy that's really well respected, that knows basketball, that can go into houses and be like, "Look, I've literally been in your shoes. I have been a top high school recruit. I have gone to a school, worked my way up there playing, and gone to the NBA and played at the highest level and made $100 million in the NBA. I can show you how to do that." No one else can go in there, and there are very few people that can walk into a room and say that, right? Like, someone said that Josh was there today. He was not. That's a stupid rumor. But Damon Stoudamire is gonna be able to walk into a recruit's room and be like, "Hey, I can help you with X, Y, and Z. Like, I can get you to the next level. I've been there. I know what it takes to get there." And that is something that's going to be easily sellable. And he talked about starting in Atlanta and working your way out, which is what you got to do here too. And that was the other thing that was sort of Josh isn't doing, right? Right now, there are two guys they recruited out of high school from Atlanta on the team. One of them is a great player, and Miles Kelly, that has a chance to be a really talented player when his career's over. The other one's Jordan Mecca, who's a guy who's been dealing with injuries and is probably a guy that needs 5 years of development to become a big man that's decent and hasn't been getting it. Any idea how Stoudamire's name made it J-Bat's list? I've heard a bunch of different stories. I told the story about Jerry Stackhouse making a call. From what I understand, it was on his radar prior to that. Who becomes a ranked team first, football or basketball? That is a really good question. That's a really good question. I don't think either do it next year. Um, unless they pull out some, turn into like they build this awesome thing around the core they have now and get like three stud guys, and then basketball could theoretically, but I think it's going to be football. I think it'll be 2024. Um, I think they are starting to have depth across the field, like you see it when I'm walking in practice. I'm not like when they were like going with putting twos out there or whatever. I wasn't like, oh, that group sucks. Like, and that was, like watching like a bunch of walk on offensive linemen and a bunch of whatevers. And like, that's not the case. The second team OL is all guys that have played some, Tyler Gibson and, Paul Teo and Wing Green. And like, they're not freshmen. They're not, Michael May, whoever. That's a big difference from a few years ago. Like when it was, I'm trying to think who like obviously Will A get thrown to the wolves and like two freshmen and then some other random walk on. That's not the case anymore. So that's been encouraging to see. Do I know the contract details yet? Value yet? I heard the length is 5 years. Heard that as well. I don't think we're going to hear anything on that for a little bit. Why does everyone want to compare this to Penny Hardaway? Penny Hardaway was hired as the head coach at his alma mater. Again, the analog is more of Jerry Stackhouse or Danny Manning or some other guy that's a head coach that was a good NBA player. They didn't just hire Mark Price or Matt Harpering or Dwayne Farrell. If they had hired Dwayne Farrell, then we would have the conversation of comparing him to Penny Hardaway. Do you know if Blue Cane had a conversation before asking with Stoudamire before asking for his release? I have not talked to Blue yet, so I don't know. Blue's very kind of low key guy. I doubt he wants to talk right now, so I haven't made that reach yet. Football question: who do we know will miss the entire spring? As of right now, I am not aware of anyone that's been totally ruled out. I don't know what Jordan Brown's situation is. Obviously, people saw him on campus in a sling. He would be the guy I'd have to ask about. I haven't asked. Who are the possible malcontents that will hit the transfer portal if they're not where they're expected to be on the end of spring depth chart. So for football, I'm not going to name who the guys are who might leave, but there's going to be some guys that leave. I think they're at like 90 scholarships right now. They need to be at 85 come August 1st. So there'll be some guys who leave. Chase Lane doesn't arrive at Georgia Tech until the summer. Someone asked about him in the chat. KQ, what are your thoughts on his strategy for putting a roster together? Do you think Damon Stoudamire hit the portal heavy or start to take what we have and recruit to high school? I think it's going to be a hybrid approach. I think he's going to try to keep the pieces he wants to keep from the team, which I would think is the sort of core guys who are playing, the 6 rotation guys that are returning. So not obviously Javon's gone, but Kyle Sturdivant, Miles Kelly, Debo Coleman, Jalen Moore, Davon Smith. That's sort of what you build around. And then you got to figure out how to add more to that, right? And you don't know what you have yet with Fred's, Paul's, or Kirill Martinoff yet. So, Jordan Mecca, those guys are sort of thing. But the Rodney Howards, the Tristan Maxwell's, I think that's where, if you're going to, make changes, I think that's where you start. And that would give you enough room to kind of make some decisions there. I could see Debo leaving, but Miles took the team and put it on his back this year. He ain't leaving. Miles Kelly's from Atlanta, and he's now got an NBA guy coaching him who can help him develop his game. Miles Kelly is far from like an all ACC level guy still. Like he is sort of a more athletic Mike DeVoe at this point. Like that's a really interesting piece to have, right? Like a guy that can sharpshoot, that can drive to the hole and score. You got to develop that second part of it and learn. He's got to learn how to drive and finish better. The best what he did all year, I think, was the first game against Georgia State. Miles has got NBA potential. There was a reason why he was a top recruit. Jalen Moore is a guy who could be developed, but Jalen Moore was, sulking on the bench, I thought, at the end of the season when he wasn't playing or he'd get pulled out quickly. Debo, I thought was miscast in the system that Josh was running. He was having to defend guys that he was giving 4 inches up on all the time. And that's probably exhausting. And he had an Achilles injury that really, really limited him. So much more than they ever let on about. So I think, I would like to see Debo stay. I think he has a chance to be an all ACC level guy eventually. He's got to stay healthy and get his body in better shape and just stay healthy so he can move better. Any other last questions, guys? We're closing in on an hour. I will take, let's see if there's any more in the chat. I mean, in the thing. Was there anything I missed? Thank you, everyone, for joining. I will ask you to make sure you smash the subscribe, hit the like button. There's 120 of you or whatever on here, and there's 43 likes. Hit the like button, man. Come on. Football questions. In your observation, what are the different roles of the coaching staff? It's hard to tell. It was the first day. I was still learning who people were visually. Like I had somebody walk up to me and one of the TV people and ask me who Buster Faulkner was. Like, it was a little bit, there was a little bit of that for me. I was having to really think about it when I was doing my photos. Like there are a few people who I immediately knew who they were, like Jeep Wade jumped out, and Buster, but a lot of them didn't, and I had to think about who it was. And, there's GAs and there's, 12 people on the field. So yeah, I think it's still going to take time to kind of learn who everybody is. But thanks everyone for joining. And who cusses the most? I was joking with Brent. Brent was at the Damon Stoudamire thing today. I said, "What's it like having your voice after the first day of practice?" And he laughed. I was like, "Does your wife surprised now when you're home and you can actually talk after. He said he'll lose his voice eventually from yelling when they start, like, playing games and stuff, but he, we'll see what happens. So just the last question's a killer. Oh my god. Someone asked me if Jeff's gonna come to a game as a fan since he loves Georgia Tech so much. So I'm pretty sure Jeff burned all his Georgia Tech stuff in a fire pit behind his house. So you're gonna see a bunch of homeless people in downtown Atlanta wearing Georgia Tech gear. On that note, I will bid you guys adieu, and hopefully, probably we'll do this again next week. Maybe not Tuesday. I think I have plans Tuesday night with my brother, but we'll get back together sometime soon.